Right, this is your next video in preparation. Short, sharp revision bursts for your medicine through time paper. This is section B, prevention of illness, 1700 to present. So, couple of things we need to mention before we go on to the video. So, first thing, prevention. We've said this in a previous video, was methods to stop people from getting sick. Now you've got two time periods here, 1700 to 1900, which is industrial, and 1900 to present, which is modern. Now, if you are asked in a GCSE question to that has two time periods, you must talk about both in this question. So, you know, three is the magic number. If you've got a question about 1700 to present, you must talk about both time periods for you to hit the higher criteria to be successful. So, prevention of illness. This should be quite a short video on how we try to prevent people getting sick. Now, the first two, 1700 to 1900. Now, in the blue is the evidence, and in the black is the explain. So, the blue is the story, the black is the impact. So, what we've got to start off with is Edward Jenner. So, the way to remember Jenner is he developed the first vaccine for smallpox. If that's the basics that you remember, fine, happy days. But at the very minimum, that's the story. Now, he did this. How did he do it? He observed milkmaids who caught cowpox. And he made a link that anyone that caught cowpox did not catch smallpox. That was his observation. However, he needed to test it. And for him to do this, he tested his theory firstly on 9-year-old James Phipps, who was given cowpox and 6 weeks later smallpox and survived. He tested the theory 11 more times and it worked. And he wrote his finding down in Inquiry into the Variola Vaccinae. Remember, it's called vaccine because vacca is Latin for cow. That's your story of Edward Jenner. If that's the detailed evidence that you remember for any GCSE paper, you're on a winner. But why did it lead to change? If you don't remember this, that's a problem because you'll get half marks for descriptive stories. You'll get full marks for understanding the change. So inoculators were banned. So an inoculator is what people used before this. Inoculators were dangerous. Now, inoculators cost the government a lot of money due to isolation, but they were a bit annoyed about losing their jobs. But the inoculators were very dangerous. And the vaccine was seen by the government as a safer method. So inoculators were banned. The vaccine was made compulsory by 1852, which means by 1900, smallpox was eradicated. It was gone. And then I think this is quite an important point here. Although there was no scientific proof, Edward Jenner was purely an observational finding. This was the platform for future vaccine ideas. And what I mean by that is that by sort of around 1860, we started to develop vaccines. So Pasteur developed a vaccine for chicken cholera. And that in itself began the process of vaccines. Right, now the second person you must be understanding is Jon Snow. Now remember, the concept is why did they help prevent illness? Now Jon Snow is a bit trickier to be able to justify. Edward Jenner, there's very clear reasons. So remember, you don't need to speak about them all. I'm going to give you four for the 1700 to 1900, and then I'm going to give you a couple for the 1900 to present. So you don't need to speak about them all, you just need to speak about three of them. So, what did Edward Jenner do? Sorry, Jon Snow do. So, Jon Snow observed the Soho cholera epidemic. So, he's a key person in regards to cholera. Jon Snow proved that cholera was caused by water, not by miasma. Okay, so if you remember Jon Snow, Edward Jenner's the vaccine guy. Jon Snow is important to prove what caused cholera. So the story, he did a spot map of all the people in Soho in London who had died of cholera and made a connection that people that died were getting their water from the Broad Street pump. He removed the handle and the number of cholera cases declined significantly. Now remember, at this point we don't know about germs, so once again this is just an observational finding. But John Snow was key to identifying that cholera was not caused by miasma. How did this cause prevention of illness to change? So one, it got the government to begin considering the importance of public health. The government had a laissez-faire attitude. Some people say that John Snow's work began to get the government thinking. They don't think it was a reason why it caused instant change, but it got the government in the long term to consider public health acts. In the short term, Snow saved lots of lives by removing the handle of the Broad Street pump. However, the government did put the handle back on not long after, and that did lead to further cases. So again, it did cause the proof there, but at the same time, in the short term, it saved many people's lives. And it began to prove that miasma was not the cause of cholera. It was proof that water was the cause. And we remember we did know there was a cesspit that had a crack in it that was seeping water into the water of the Broad Street pump. So Jon Snow, really important in regards to helping the government begin to change their attitudes. Now, this is one that's a bit of an. We've got to be really careful with this one because he is a reason for prevention, but he can also be a reason for improvement in treatment. Joseph Lister. Because Joseph Lister used carbolic acid to prevent infection in surgery. Now, the story. He used it on a young boy who had a compound fracture, which is the worst kind of fracture. Normally, it would lead to an amputation, but he wrapped it up in carbolic acid and the boy survived. They started to use carbolic acid in surgery because there was a high death rate, mortality rate due to infection, and it reduced infection from 40% to 15%. However, people stopped using it because it dried out the surgeon's hands. But the big thing with this is that the use of carbolic acid, although it stopped being used, convinced surgeons to focus on aseptic surgery, germ-free surgery. This is progress because surgery improved, outcomes improved. Less people died of infection. Lister significantly improved the attitudes towards surgery by encouraging people to use aseptic, germ-free. And surgery could improve and it could be longer because infection was not a big problem anymore. Remember, aseptic surgery meant clean gowns, washed equipment, changing masks and gloves, whereas before that, people were wearing bloody gloves because it showed, bloody gowns because it was showing experience, and there wasn't an attitude of cleanliness. So Lister, really important to the concept of prevention. The government were probably one of the most important reasons because the government did throw a lot of support behind all of these people eventually. So if you get a question comparing the government to people, the government at this point really lost their laissez-faire attitude. So the government introduced in 1875 the Second Public Health Act. Now, the government tried to do this before in the 1830s, however, they didn't make it compulsory. This was compulsory for everyone, and it said they had to have clean water, public parks, boards of health. People's responsibility were now to look after the people that lived in their areas. But I think the big thing at this point is that because of this, the government took responsibility for medicine. The laissez-faire attitude was gone and public health improved. Areas became cleaner. This is a turning point for medicine because the government now start providing a lot of money for future medical advancements, which we'll talk about on the final slide. Now, 1900 to present is very different. We have more science, we have more technology, but we have a government now that provides a significant amount of money for medical development. So, 1900s, the government introduced a range of vaccine campaigns. Now, the point of a vaccine campaign is to prevent mortality in later life. So things like TB, which people would have had their jabs for when they were younger. It's really important that people have jabs when they are younger to prevent them getting problems when they're an adult. And it also takes pressure off the NHS. But the point of this was to vaccinate the population of illnesses which causes issues, particularly for children, TB and polio, illnesses that can cause paralysis and severe chest problems. The government basically said that all parents had to vaccinate their children because prevention's more impactful than getting the illness. So vaccine campaigns, really important, especially for children. The government also got involved in the 1900s through lifestyle campaigns. We now know the way we live could make us sicker in the long run. So the government introduced a range of lifestyle campaigns to ensure that people live a healthier life. Change for Life is about your sugar consumption. Drink Aware is about alcohol. And Stoptober is about smoking. All of these are to prevent people from getting illnesses when they are older. And the government especially zoned in on smoking because of the increase of lung cancer, which became the most common form of cancer in the 1960s and beyond. So the government have passed laws to prevent children from smoking, stop smokers, and also to protect people from passive smoking. So just remember for any exam, if you get something called modern prevention, the government raised the age from 16 to 18. Banning smoking in cars with children under 18. So there's just something missing there. Banning smoking in cars with children under 18. Cigarette packaging had warning for health. Cigarettes cannot be in the view in shops, and sport events cannot be sponsored by companies anymore. So the government, even though, and they raised taxes as well, even though it's a very profitable industry for the government, they understand that actually the impact it can have on the NHS is a lot more significant moving forward. That's your prevention from industrial to modern. Have a look over those and please don't forget the concept of what did it prevent in regards to stopping people from getting sick.